A few days ago, you may remember I did a video and also released a press statement about President Obama's criticism of Israel's decision to build 1,600 new housing units in East Jerusalem. And I praised the president's criticism of Israel, and moreover, I called on the United States to call for the immediate end to the blockade of Gaza, which essentially is imprisoning 1.5 million Palestinians in a collective imprisonment, collective punishment, which is illegal under international law. Now, there's been a lot of controversy about the president's statements and the statements of our Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, statements that I approved of. And in my hands, I now have a statement that was issued by my opponent, Gillibrand. It was actually put out a week ago, and I only discovered it now. And I want to read it to you, and I want to put it up on the screen so you can see it yourself. The close bond between the United States and Israel remains unbreakable, and America will continue to show unyielding support for Israel's security. While the timing of the East Jerusalem housing announcement was regrettable, it must not cloud the most critical foreign policy issue facing both countries: Iran's nuclear threat. As a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I am focused on strengthening international pressure on Iran's regime to derail its pursuit of nuclear weapons. Now, that statement is naive, it's more of the same, and it is astonishing that we have a United States Senator who serves on the Foreign Relations Committee yet seems ignorant of some basic facts about the Middle East. Now, I'm going to talk a lot more about Iran in the future, and I look forward to debating my opponent about the question of Iran and the Middle East. But let me say right now that the greatest strategic threat in the Middle East is not Iran. And for those of us who worked very hard to stop the Iraq War, it feels like deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra would say. That this is yet another attempt to gin up and heighten and inflame attitudes towards a country that is not a strategic threat to the United States. Anytime the world wants to talk about the illegal and immoral occupation of Palestine and of the occupied territories, people like my opponent want to change the subject to Iran. It is the continued failure to reach a just peace between the Palestinians and Israelis that is the greatest strategic threat to the United States and to Israel, and of course to the people who live in the West Bank and Gaza. All the violence and the militarization flows from the continued violence in that conflict, and it does not have anything to do with Iran. My opponent also says, while the timing of the East Jerusalem housing announcement was regrettable. Now, when would that timing have been not regrettable, according to my opponent? My opponent does not seem to understand, or she is willfully ignoring, and both explanations are troubling, that no one in the international community sees the building of housing in East Jerusalem as legal, whether it happens yesterday, today, or tomorrow. There is no timing problem. It is fundamentally a simple issue of international law. And my opponent seems to not care about international law as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, and that should be troubling to voters. Now, I do care about international law. I believe the United States is strongest when it shows the world community that it will abide by international law. Now, speaking of international law, I would urge my opponent as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee to get a copy of the 1991 Gulf War UN resolution, a resolution that was fundamentally drafted by the United States. And in that resolution, it calls for a nuclear weapons-free zone. So if our country truly wants to abide by international law, we would work to rid the region of all nuclear weapons, and that would include nuclear weapons possessed by Israel. I want to end by focusing on what my opponent says should be this country's unyielding support for Israel's security. What does it mean to have unyielding support for Israel's security. Now, I believe again that my opponent at best has a naive position that endangers Israel, because the only way to ensure Israel's security is to end the occupation of the Palestinian people. And again, one could easily make great inroads towards some just peace by calling for an immediate end to the blockade of Gaza, which, as I said before, is imprisoning 1.5 million Palestinians. You know, foreign relations is about respect for the rule of law, even if you don't agree with it, and even if it doesn't fit your narrow interests. I believe in respect for international law. That's why I've had these positions about a two-state solution for a very long time. I think the choice is clear. Voters in this election are going to be able to vote between more of the same naive insider vision, which has caused so much turmoil, death, and destruction for several decades, or you can vote for real change.